Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Olivera Zatezalo, and I'm Chief Security Officer at Huawei Canada. I'm also co-chair of CISO Forum Canada, and I'm one of the advisory board members for Canadian women in cybersecurity. So I would like to take this opportunity first to thank CyberX for doing an amazing job, and to thank all speakers and you guys for attending these sessions. We are doing an amazing job here. I'm very proud of what we accomplished over the last 2 years within Canadian women in cybersecurity. So I'm here today to talk to you about the emerging threat landscape. But before I do that, I'll just take a minute to introduce myself and all the work I've done over the last 20 plus years, because it's going to be very relevant for the today's presentation. So right now, in my current role as Chief Security Officer at Huawei Canada, I'm responsible to work with Canadian government and to make sure that all products and services Huawei sells in Canada are compliant with Canadian laws and regulations. Prior to joining Huawei, I have spent over 20 years working for the Canadian national telecommunication provider, critical infrastructure. So I have a lot of experience building and securing a network for Canadian big businesses, small businesses, and Canadian government. So today I'm here to talk to you about emerging threat landscape. And where I would like to start is I would like to take a look back at what have happened over the last few years. So we've been talking about 5G networks for 4 to 5 years right now. And as of last year, as of 2020, we started seeing these 5G networks being rolled out around the globe and in Canada too. These 5G networks are definitely changing, or they're going to be changing the way we work and the way we live. And on the top of that, last year, COVID happened, and we all have been asked to stay home and to work from home, to use these telecommunication networks to connect to people, to do the work, to entertain ourselves, and to socialize. So literally our lives, thanks to these networks, telecommunication networks that we heavily rely on, have moved to a digital space. So what we have seen is that all our economic and our social transactions are becoming digitalized. While doing online banking and social networking and using these industrial networks in the Canadian industry, we are generating a lot of digital data, and we are relying heavily on these digital data. So some of this data is very trivial, and some of this data is very sensitive. Some of this data contains our credit card information, it contains our private information, our SIN numbers, and it absolutely needs to be protected. So looking around us, you see we are on these 4G, 5G networks. We are using our mobile phone to do these transactions, financial transactions, social networking. So we are actually in a very complex ecosystem, and protecting cybersecurity and privacy of this data, it's also a very complex job. So policymakers in Canada and around the globe have a very important role to play when it comes to providing us with the guidelines and advising us what do we need to do in a physical and in digital cybersecurity to protect cybersecurity and privacy of our data. So what I have done throughout this presentation, in order to clearly explain you the issues, I have tried to categorize all cybersecurity challenges into 5 different categories to be able to explain them to you clearly. So I think it is very important to understand that one of the biggest issues we have, not just in Canada, but globally, is improving the general public's digital literacy. Lots of these issues, security breaches that are surfacing in the media, are due to the lack of the digital literacy and cybersecurity and privacy knowledge. So this is, I would say, one of the top issues, not just in Canada, but globally, that we need to understand and address. Second, very important area is the small businesses. Like, we need to find a way to support small institutions in their digital transformation. And these days, during the COVID, this is becoming more important than ever because everybody is going digital. Third important area is the critical infrastructure. So critical infrastructure, all essential services to the well-being of Canadians. So this would be telecommunication networks, energy sector, food, health, banking, you name it, all these essential services. We need to make sure that these critical infrastructure and government networks are protected. Fourth category would be new technology introduction. So we have to keep up with changing technological environment. So when I say technological environment, so this is these 5G networks that I mentioned, artificial intelligence, big data, IoT devices, all these emerging technologies, we have to understand the risks they bring us. And the very last, very important category is policing effort. So the first four categories, they're mainly dealing with the prevention or prevention of cyber criminality, but also policing, identifying and prosecuting cyber criminals is becoming increasingly important to reduce the impact of these crimes. So moving on, in order to clearly paint the cybersecurity landscape in Canada, I think it's important to start from the cyber criminals, from these actors, and understand who they are, what motivates them, what are the tactics, and what objectives do they have. They all have very different objectives. So before I go into that, into more details, first I would like to say that we do see that 70% of cyber attacks on the Canadian corporations are coming from the external factors. But having said that, we shouldn't forget about internal factors or inside threats. So this could be a disgruntled employee or simply uneducated or unaware employee. And these people who don't understand what they are doing, or who actually, because of their lack of cybersecurity training, exposing corporations to the risk, they're also presenting a threat. So I would like to highlight that, because not all cyber attacks are caused from external actors. 30% of them are coming from internal, like employees or partners of the corporations. So now let's look at different external actors. So I would like to start from cyber terrorists. So this group, extremist group, they're using cyber techniques to intimidate an audience, to force a political change, or to cause the fear or physical harm. Their objective is to disrupt the critical infrastructure, to modify or delete intelligence record of non-terrorists. Next, equally important groups is state sponsor actors. So these are highly sophisticated groups, and they're receiving the guidance and funding and technical assistance from nation states. So their targets like corporations, governments. Why they're doing this? They want to gain the access to the intelligence, to information, or for espionage campaigns. Cyber criminals. So these are malicious individuals or organized group who are assessing personal information, financial information, or health data in order to monetize it. hacktivists. So these are organized groups seeking to bring awareness, a cause, or exercise of free speech. And they're also after our personal information or after a specific target. And lastly, thrill seekers. So these are cynical, opportunistic individuals who are trying to get an access to our system and just to be able to claim it, to claim the ownership of a successful cyber attack. They also play an important role in this cybersecurity landscape. So moving on, I would also like to review with you the targets and typical objectives of these criminal actors. So they are targeting individuals, they are targeting Canadian citizens, they are targeting Canadian businesses, multinational corporations, large enterprises, or small businesses. They are targeting critical infrastructure, telecommunication network, financial institutions, energy sectors, and also government institutions. So going back to, let's say, when it comes to targeting Canadian citizens, why do they do that? Across all these targets, financial gain or financial resources would be one of the main objectives. Also, when it comes to Canadian citizens, they're after their personal information, they're after their reputation, they're looking to harm their reputation or to enable identity theft. When it comes to corporations and businesses, again, financial goal is always there, but also stealing intellectual property or reducing productivity. In the case of competitors, they're definitely after the corporations or big businesses to reduce their productivity. When it comes to critical infrastructure, it's important to understand that their objective is to disrupt essential services, being telecommunication, water supply, banking services, and also to reduce productivity. And when it comes to government institution, so this is to influence political opinions, to harm national security, to enable terrorism or the espionage. So number of different targets and different objectives. So in order to understand the role that policymakers are playing in Canadian cybersecurity landscape, it's also important to understand who is who in Canadian policy making. So what I would like for us to say that because of the national and international nature of cybersecurity falls under federal jurisdiction. So mainly you're going to see federal government departments or agencies having to do work or having responsibility when it comes to cybersecurity. So they are in charge of coming up with this very complex framework of the cybersecurity framework that we use as a guideline to protect cybersecurity Canadian corporations from cybersecurity attacks. So what you see here on these slides, first, very important role, it's a Public Safety Canada. So this is a government department that have a responsibility to formulate and support implementation of the national cybersecurity strategy. They also coordinate cybersecurity efforts with national and international stakeholders. Second, very important department is the Treasury Board. So Treasury Board have a responsibility to oversee the government-wide development and implementation of proper cybersecurity measures. Underneath of Treasury Board, it's a Shared Services Canada. And I'm just going to reflect of my past experience being a director at MTS Stream, which is one of the, at that time was a national telecommunication provider. So when MTS Stream won a deal to build a managed WAN network for Government of Canada, we used IPSG 33, which is the Canadian standard used for the cybersecurity risk management, published by the Treasury Board. And actually, my responsibility was to implement every single control from that cybersecurity standards, and then to travel to Ottawa and do live witnessing with Shared Services Canada. So I'm just sharing this as an example to illustrate how this all comes together. So Shared Services Canada being responsible for the most IT infrastructure, they also had responsibility to certify all providers of the telecommunication services to Government of Canada. And they had the responsibility to do live witnessing of all security controls implemented on the telecommunication networks that is being used to connect all government offices. And the last one, National Defense. So National Defense, they support research and development efforts of the public and private sector in the cybersecurity protection and critical infrastructure. Underneath National Defense, there is a Canadian Security Establishment, CSC. So in my current role, I continue to work very closely with CSC. I do run a security review program for Huawei Canada, which is used to certify 3G and 4G equipment used currently deployed in Canada. And this is guided by a communication security establishment. Also, very important role is Canadian Center for Cybersecurity. So they are right now like a cyber center that informs and unites most federal expertise in cybersecurity, and they are actually advising Canadian businesses and corporations on the cybersecurity risk and threats. So all these departments and agencies play a critical role, and I'm going to be referring back to them as we go to learn more about each and every challenge that we are facing. So now I would like to go back to the security categories or challenges that we identify at the beginning of this presentation. So as I said, number one priority for us should be improving public digital literacy in cybersecurity. So cyber criminals, they actually regularly rely on lack of cybersecurity knowledge of the general public to perpetrate their actions. And it's important to understand, and I think I mentioned that previously, that 30% of war attacks on the Canadian corporations are internal, and very often they're due to lack of cybersecurity knowledge among employees, and very often they're unintentional. So somebody would do something without understanding an implication. So when it comes to protecting Canadian citizens and Canadian corporation businesses, I think two key considerations from the policymakers are awareness campaigns and training. So not many people know that we in Canada have a Get Cyber Safe campaign organized by Canadian government. And this is a far-reaching media campaign that is used to educate Canadian public on the threats we are seeing in everyday's life. I'm following them on Twitter. They're very active, and I think we should build on the top of that. I'm not sure that many people know of this media campaign, and I think everybody would definitely would benefit from these feeds. Another vehicle that we use in Canada and globally is Cybersecurity Awareness Month, and we should definitely continue using that. October is the Cybersecurity Awareness Month, and I'm sure all cybersecurity experts are very active during this month. On a daily basis, we do have campaigns. When it comes to training, it is absolutely essential to train employees how to handle sensitive data. But in order to do that, corporations also have to build a sound cybersecurity program and to first categorize and identify the sensitive data, and then to make sure that everybody who is touching this sensitive data understand their role and responsibility when it comes to when it comes to provide to protecting this sensitive data. Also, I would like to mention that there are lots of associations, not just in Canada, but global, like Anti-Phishing Working Group, and they're very active in educating not just global organization, but also general public on phishing attacks. And it's worth mentioning that in United K, they do have employee training course certification programs. So same as what we have in Canada, Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity, in United Kingdom, they have National Cybersecurity Centre. So this center is in charge of providing this employee training, which provides certification. It's a very useful tool, and this is definitely something that we may do in Canada. So moving on, I would like to talk about another very important segment, and this is small businesses. So we all witness how small business were under the pressure to move into digital space over the last year during the COVID pandemic. And what's important to understand that cyber attacks affect businesses of all sizes, but their impact is particularly significant for small businesses. So I'm using this diagram to explain you and to just justify this with the data from the 2019. So in 2019, the average cost of the cyber attack for the big Canadian corporations that have over 25,000 employees was $6.9 million. So when you calculate that cost per employee, that would be less than $276 per employee for the big corporations. If you look for this data for the small businesses, less than 500 employees, the cost of cyber attack is still high. It's $3.7 million. But because they have less employees, the cost per employee is over $7,000. It's over $7,400. So for that reason, it is very important to understand how do we protect these small businesses. Also, I would like to mention, not many of us know that 55% of Canadians work for companies that are smaller than 500 employees. These companies have limited capacity in cybersecurity, and very often you're going to see it in the media, they are falling victims to ransomware or phishing. We've seen a number of municipal organizations in Canada in 2019 in the media, like Woodstock in Ontario, Stratford, Ottawa, Saskatoon in Saskatchewan. They're all victims of such an incident. So it is very important to provide and support as they move into digital space. So I would like to spend a little bit of time understanding the cost of the small businesses when they actually go to ransom attack. And this is the data from the 2018 ransom attack on the Wasaga Beach. So as you can see from this diagram, they had an issue, and they started talking to these cyber criminals. And initially, cyber criminals asked them for 11 bitcoins. It was like 140K at that time. This was 2018 we are talking about. Now that would be much more money. So they managed to negotiate, after 7 weeks of negotiation, they managed to come down from 140K to pay ransom 35K. So they managed to negotiate almost like 5 times less. But when you look at all additional costs that they experienced during these 7 weeks, this $35,000 that they pay for the ransom is just 1/5 of the total cost. So they pay significant amount to computer consultants, 37K. They also pay significant amount to internal staff overtime, 31K, and they also suffer internal productivity loss of $132,000. So when you put all this together, it's not just the payment that you make to cyber criminals, so 35K, it is actually total cost, which is 252K. So it's 5 times more. So for that reason, it is very important to prevent these issues and to prevent these incidents. How do we do that? So in Canada, we started something called Cybersecurity Canada. So this is a certification program led by ISED. So they provide their support and encourage all these small businesses to do their cybersecurity risk assessment and to understand what they need to do to prevent this incident. By far, the best way to mitigate these risks is to migrate to the cloud. There's a lot of benefit for small businesses into cloud migration because they can use this expertise, cybersecurity expertise from the cloud providers. So definitely, this is something that policymakers and should encourage. So moving on, my favorite topic, critical infrastructure. So I've been working in critical infrastructure for over 25 years right now. And it is very clear that these critical infrastructure, all critical infrastructures, are increasingly adopting digital technology for the number of different reasons. Like one reason would be to improve their monitoring. Another reason would be to provide a better capacity management or to enhance decision making. Number of different reasons for the critical infrastructure provider to move or to adopt digital technology. At the same time, by doing that, they are opening the doors for more cybersecurity attacks. And unfortunately, we have seen some of these attacks internationally. In Ukraine, December 2015, they suffer a big power disruption, and over 200 people in Ukraine lost electricity. Luckily, in Canada, we haven't seen that, but we did see multiple hospital and healthcare networks that were affected by WannaCry a few years ago. Also, there is no need to spend more time on the importance of telecommunication networks as a critical infrastructure, especially during these days of the pandemic. And as somebody who spent over 20 years working in critical infrastructure, I have to say that I personally learned a lot from Canadian government. They guided telecommunication providers how to do cybersecurity risk assessment. As I mentioned, Shared Services Canada, I work closely with them. They provided a lot of support in people who are trying to certify their networks to be used by government organizations. And also CSC is doing an amazing job helping across the different critical infrastructure sectors, not just telecommunications. It's also worth mentioning that Public Safety Canada, they organized these symposiums to offer technical training on this subject. So before I joined, when I was part of this telecommunication network, I attended some of these symposiums, and they are very valuable for the people working in the critical infrastructure. So moving on, another favorite topic for me is the new technology. So first, I would like to start with 5G. So 5G is definitely changing the way we work and the way we live. And I think it's also important to say that 5G is being rolled out on the top of 4G. So whatever we knew about 4G security, we can use in 5G. What's the difference between 5G and 4G is that in 5G reference architecture, you're actually using software-based virtual networks, and we are moving into these virtual functions. We are moving network functions into virtual functions. So cybersecurity is becoming critically important because of this new technology introduction that comes with 5G, as well as the new use cases. So there are a number of use cases that 5G is bringing, and with the use of artificial intelligence, with the use of new sensors. And before you start deploying or looking into deploying any of these use cases, it's very important to do a proper risk assessment. So just to recap, on the 5G front, risk comes from new technology and from use cases. I would also like to spend a little bit more time on artificial intelligence. I've been speaking publicly about artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, and privacy frameworks a lot. And this is something that corporations have responsibility to implement before they start utilizing these big data and artificial intelligence algorithms. So they literally need to understand the risk, and they need to translate this risk into the proper cybersecurity and privacy framework, and they need to teach their employees on their role and responsibility when it comes to implementing artificial intelligence within their corporations. And yes, we are going to see these AI algorithms implemented across different verticals. We are going to see them implemented in internal corporations for a number of different efficiencies. For example, HR can use artificial intelligence to screen the candidates, or call centers can use artificial intelligence to categorize the customers. And then when you look at verticals like transportation, autonomous driving, there is lots of work that has to be done on cybersecurity and privacy policies before we start using this in everyday's work. Also important mentioning that policies around cybersecurity testing, attestation, certifications are going to be critically important when it comes to deploying safe AI systems. And also, I would like to spend a little bit of time on the IoT. So IoT, Internet of Things, or Internet of Everything, or Internet of Eyes, there are a number of different names. We are going to see these sensors being implemented around us. They're going to be collecting this data. Some of this data may be sensitive, some of this data may be private. These data are going to be pushed through the networks to big data databases. And it's absolutely important to understand that whole part when we are collecting, sending, and actually keeping a repository of these data in big data databases. Why do I think this is a little bit different? Because when it comes to IoT, it is increasingly important to push your vendors and to ask your IoT vendors for these sensors for their certification. There are lots of standards right now being published, even including NIST is publishing the standards for the IoT security. Please look it up, search it up, and make sure you understand the risk you are implementing both from the cybersecurity and from the privacy perspective. And this privacy perspective is becoming increasingly important for the healthcare, because we are going to see a lot of these wearable monitor and IoT sensors being used in the healthcare, and it's going to be very important to make sure we know the risk and we know how to protect from the breaches. So how do we do that? So education here is the key. So addressing this cyber risk should be done through focused research and development of new security tools and best practices, and through the development of knowledgeable workplace capable of implementing them. And also, I would like to mention, and we've been talking about that a lot, that you don't need to have computer science degree to work in cybersecurity. There are so many different domains in cybersecurity. Let's go back to the security awareness and training. Like people with the teaching certification or people with communication skills, they would be a better fit to do this cybersecurity awareness training in cybersecurity, than, let's say, computer scientists. So I want to emphasize this, that education diversity in cybersecurity is very important, because literally cybersecurity is everybody's job, and we need people from all different walks of life to help us with that. Now, I would like to spend a little bit more time on the policing. So, as we've seen, all these previous challenges that I talked about, being digital literacy or cybersecurity protection of critical infrastructure and new technology introduction, they're all dealing with prevention. But in order to reduce the rate and impact of cyber crimes, the identification and prosecution of these criminal actors is becoming very important and essential. Why? So when we look at the Statistics Canada data for 2017, 20% of Canadian corporations reported cybersecurity incidents. Only 10% of them have reported them to police. Number of different reasons for that. Like, these attacks are very often so sophisticated, and they're very difficult to trace and to track. And also, it's very, very difficult to provide an evidence. So definitely there is a lot of work that has to be done in improving capabilities within the organization, and also capabilities of law enforcement when it comes to investigation of these attacks. Also, it's important to understand that these cyber attacks, they are global in nature, and then international cooperation and collaboration is becoming very, very important. When it comes to international cooperation and collaboration, I would like to mention, for example, 2 years ago, when we negotiated the former NAFTA, which is a USMCA trade deal with the United States and Mexico, there was a formal engagement documented in USMCA that speaks about development and advanced cyber incident response in between these three countries. So this is what we need to see. More of these formal engagements we need to see documented in our trade agreements across the different nations. So what's important to remember? I think it is very important to remember and to understand that these technology and these cyber criminals are very sophisticated, and there is no way to slow them down. There is no entity that can slow cyber criminal down, for the simple reason that it's a very profitable business. Also, it's very important to understand that technology evolves faster than laws. And it's going to be very difficult to keep this in sync. And for that reason, legal framework is most likely to always lag on a cyber criminal tactics. But regardless, it is very important to review this legal framework on a regular basis, to consider the cyber criminal evolving tactics that's still beneficial, even if there is a lag, or even if there is a delay. And last, I still want to reinforce that international cooperation and collaboration on this, because cyber attacks are global, and it's a challenge that we all. It is the challenge that we all face. And in closing, what I would like to highlight is that it is very clear the environment we live in, it's very complex. It is a very complex ecosystem from the number of different perspectives, from the ethical perspectives, from the legal perspective, from societal perspective, and business impact. This cybersecurity criminal activities, as well as privacy issues, and they have to be clearly assessed and understood before we move forward with any use case, artificial intelligence use case, IoT use case. We need to look closely into ethical implications, into legal, into societal applications, and the impact to our business. It's also very important to understand that, again, I'm going to reiterate that cyber attacks are showing no sign of slowing down. We are going to see more and more of them. They're going to be very sophisticated. We're going to start to see use of artificial intelligence in cyber attacks. And the only way to respond to them would be to spend time on education, on understanding of these issues. And Canadian policymakers have a big role to play in understanding, advising us, and also in encouraging collaboration with the rest of the world on these issues. So I think with this, I would like to wrap up my presentation, and I would like right now to go into the questions. So I think we have been asked to share the questions in the chat. So I'm here to answer any questions that you guys might have. So let me just make sure I do this properly and I go into your questions. Okay. Okay, so let me go one by one. Okay, so yes, I do see your questions. Thank you. Just take me a little bit of the time to go through them and read them. So I think what I see right now is the first question is the question regarding the policy landscape and how Canada rank in comparison to other countries. So I'm very proud to say that I believe we in Canada have one of the best cybersecurity practices in the world. And I see that looking back at what we've done, the work we've done with the Canadian government, with CSC, with Treasury Board, with Shared Services. Also in October 2018, CSC has launched Canadian Center for Canadian Center for Cybersecurity. Yes, so this is a national SOC, and we are using them services to understand the threats. So also based on some other work on the risk assessment of telecommunication equipment, I know that Canadians were at the top of the game. And so I can say with the lots of evidence that I've seen over the last few years, that definitely we are among the top. So that was one of the questions. So I'm moving on with the question, what are some suggestions you can offer to see executives as they plan their budget? Okay. Yes. So this is the question regarding our discussion with the board of directors or with the executives. Depending on the size of the organization, I would definitely encourage executives to look to collaborate with Canadian government and to look for the way to additional certification when it comes to cybersecurity. So I think I've touched a little bit on the certification for small businesses. This is something that ISET has started, I believe, 2 years ago. And there's a lots of knowledge that can be shared that small businesses can actually gain with working with ISET on these certification for the small businesses. Also, I think another very important suggestion for the smaller businesses would be move to the cloud and just use all cybersecurity expertise that managed cloud providers have, and also learn from them. And so I talked about certification for small businesses. Also, I personally worked on certification for Allstream business when Allstream was selected to be a management provider to Canadian government. As I said, there is a standard for that. There is a Canadian standard ITSG 33, which is equivalent of NIST SP 853. So this is a standard for the cybersecurity risk assessment, or 500 controls over 70 or nowadays 18 different domains. And I learned a lot from that, and I would actually recommend all organizations, regardless of the business they are in, to go to these standards and try to understand and learn the controls and see which of these controls are applicable to them. You don't have to implement all 500 controls, but definitely, even if you don't go for certification, you can do a lot by understanding the controls recommended by a Treasury board through ITSG 33 standards. Okay, another question is regarding cloud. So let me first read it and then I'll paraphrase it for you. Yes, so the question is regarding the cloud being just another server room, and then the risk and liability are still the same with the organization owning the data and risk. So this is a very good question. And I think I touched base on that one when I said the organization have a responsibility to do data classification. And coming from the very big Canadian organization, I understand how difficult this task is. So personally, attempted Allstream, and that was an organization at that time of 8,000 to 10,000 people. That was the biggest challenge. Implementing security controls was easier, but classifying the data and understanding who is the owner of data, who takes the responsibility to own this data, was one of the most difficult exercises I ever undertook. So I think it's absolutely right. Whoever asked this question is that the data owners have responsibility to classify the data and to assign security controls, and then based on the security controls and data sensitivity, work on the privilege level. Who has the privilege to access this data within the corporation? And do you think we need to rethink home or residential security? Okay, and then another one, will cyber insurance be must? Okay, so this is cyber insurance. A lot of organizations are going to cyber insurance. So definitely, I think organizations should look into that. And the last question would be on the threat intelligence feed. So my advice would be, again, for all Canadian organizations, small or large, to reach out to Canadian government. There is a lot of good information, knowledge base that you can learn on the Government of Canada site, and also they have information about threats. And I think lastly, when it comes to threat sharing, I think it's worth mentioning that we in Canada in December 2016 launched CCTF, which is Canadian Cyber Threat Exchange. So this is not for profit organization. And I know they are actually growing their membership and they're exchanging the threats. So I would also encourage you guys to look into that for the threat intelligence. So I think without reading line by line and word by word, I went through all the questions. Thank you so much for asking these questions, very interesting and intriguing questions. I'm very passionate about cybersecurity, and I'm very passionate about sharing the knowledge with younger generations and with the people working in cybersecurity and privacy. And if there are any additional questions that you would like to discuss with me, you are welcome to reach out. I'm available on the LinkedIn. I'm available on Twitter. So let's continue talking and discussing these important topics and issues. So I think we reached the end. thank you so much. Keep learning and keep educating yourself. That's the only way to go. Thank you. There's one more question. Okay, thank you. Didn't see it. Okay, so yeah, sorry, I missed that one. So the question is, do you think that we need to rethink home and residential security as more enterprise services move remotely? Will cyber insurance be a have must have as opposed to a need to have? So, speaking about residential security, I think it's up to each and every organization that asking their people to work from home to provide training and the guidance. How do you do this in a secure fashion? Right now, most organizations are using VPN, so that's a very secure way to do a work remotely. You establish a secure tunnel and you go to the town to do the work. What we see with the migration to the cloud, we see that this VPN is not going to be that effective because even if you established the security tunnel to your organization network, this organization may be moving the data to the cloud, and this data is not going to be within the organizational perimeter. So I think what I see happening is this zero trust security reference architecture. So basically, zero trust security reference architecture is that you're going to be assessing the trust of whoever is asking to have an access to this data on the fly in the real time. So I do believe that we are going to be eventually rethinking the way we do security, both from people working remotely and for the organization. And I think this is the way to go. I think that zero trust security reference architecture is the way to go. For the insurances, I don't know what to tell you there. I know that lots of companies are taking insurance, but I think we looked at during my presentation that this cost, the cyber breach, can be very high. So definitely cyber insurance can provide some safety net, but I think the better practice is to make sure you clearly understand your cyber risk and you work with the experts who address your cyber risk and prevent security breaches. Because even if you have insurance, the damage to the reputation, damage to the Canadian citizens that you can inflict by sharing the personal data, there is no price tag for that. I actually don't see any other questions. So if there are any other questions, please let me know. I think I answer all the questions. Yes. If not, you can reach to me on LinkedIn or Twitter. Yeah, we talk about